The sound of laughter at my expense was not new, but tonight, under the crystal chandeliers of Le Cuckoo, it had a sharper, metallic taste. I swirled the Merlot in my glass, watching the crimson legs run down the side, focusing on the physics of the wine rather than the woman sitting across from me. Elena looked radiant. That was the undeniable, painful truth. She wore a backless emerald dress that cost more than my first car, and her hair was pinned up in that effortless way that took 2 hours to perfect. She was the woman of the hour, the newly appointed vice president of marketing for breathless ad executives, and I was the accessory she had dragged along to complete the tableau of her success. Honestly, I don't know how he manages to dress himself without my input, Elena said, her voice projecting perfectly to the far end of the long, white-clothed table. She rested a hand on my forearm, a gesture that looked affectionate to the dozen people watching, but felt like a shackle to me. I told him, "Mark, darling, the navy suit implies power. The tweed jacket makes you look like a geography teacher who lost his map." The table erupted in polite, lubricated laughter. Julian, her boss, and the man sitting directly to her left chuckled the loudest. He leaned back, his eyes glinting with a mix of arrogance and something far more possessive. "He's a steady hand, Elena," Julian said, raising his glass in a mock salute to me. "Every kite needs a string, right? Otherwise, you just fly away." "Oh, Mark isn't the string, Julian," Elena corrected, her smile tight and dazzling. "He's the rock. Sitting there, not moving, gathering moss while I do the flying." More laughter. A few glances were cast my way, some pitying, most amused. I forced the corner of my mouth up. It was the role I had played for the last 2 years, the supportive, slightly bumbling husband of the superstar executive, the man who was lucky to be there. The waiter arrived with the appetizers, breaking the tension for a fleeting second. I looked down at the scallop on my plate. I wasn't hungry. My stomach felt like it was filled with broken glass. I had been waiting for this dinner for 3 days. 3 days of holding my breath. 3 days of memorizing the image burned into my retina. "So, Mark," one of Elena's junior associates asked, trying to be polite, "how is the architecture firm going? Still working on that library project?" Before I could answer, Elena cut in. "Oh, please, don't get him started on the library. It's a community center in Jersey, not the Guggenheim. He stresses over the atrium lighting like he's curing cancer. I keep telling him, 'Honey, nobody looks up. They're just looking at their phones.'" She squeezed my arm again, her nails digging in slightly. "I'm just teasing, babe. We're proud of your little buildings." Little buildings. That was the signal. It was the specific phrase I had promised myself I would wait for. It was the boundary line between the man I used to be, the one who loved her blindly, and the man I was about to become. I reached into the inner pocket of my geography teacher jacket. My fingers brushed against the thick, glossy photo paper. It felt heavy, heavier than a piece of paper had any right to be. "Actually," I said. My voice was calm, lower than the chatter around the table, but it cut through the noise. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tremble. I simply ceased to be the background noise. The table went quiet, mostly because I rarely spoke when Elena was holding court. Elena looked at me, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "What is it, Mark? Do you need the waiter?" "I don't need a waiter," I said, looking directly at Julian, then shifting my gaze to my wife. "I just wanted to add a toast to the new vice president." Elena relaxed slightly, expecting a generic, devoted husband speech she could patronize later in the car. "That's sweet." "To Elena," I continued, standing up slowly. I picked up my wine glass but didn't drink. "Who has always believed in maximizing opportunities, and to Julian for hands-on mentorship." The air in the room changed. It was subtle, a drop in barometric pressure. Julian's smile faltered. Elena froze, her hand halfway to her wine glass. "I realized tonight that I really am holding you back, Elena," I said, my voice steady, conversational. "You need someone who matches your ambition, someone who understands the late nights, the business trips to Miami when the conference was actually in Chicago." "Mark, you're drunk," Elena hissed, her smile vanishing. "Sit down." "I'm stone cold sober, Elle," I replied. "That's the problem." I pulled the photograph out of my pocket. It wasn't in an envelope. I didn't want the theatrics of unwrapping it. I wanted the brutality of immediate sight. It was a clear, high-resolution image. 11:42 p.m., 3 days ago. The back seat of Julian's chauffeured Lincoln, parked outside our townhouse while I was supposedly asleep upstairs. The interior light of the car was on. The windows were tinted to the world, but not to the camera lens of the security drone I had been testing for that little community center project. The angle was unforgiving. Elena's face thrown back in ecstasy. Julian's hand tangled in her hair. It was carnal, undeniable, and pathetic. I placed the photo face up in the center of the table, directly between the breadbasket and the centerpiece of white lilies. "I think this belongs to you," I said softly. For 3 seconds, there was no sound in the restaurant except for the clinking of silverware from other tables. Then the collective intake of breath from our table sucked the oxygen out of the air. Julian turned a shade of pale that made him look like a corpse. He recognized the car. He recognized the moment. Elena looked down. Her eyes widened, the pupils blowing out until her eyes were black holes. She made a noise, a strangled, wet gasp that got caught in her throat. She looked up at me, and for the first time in years, the arrogance was gone. It was replaced by sheer animal terror. "Mark," she whispered, reaching for the photo to hide it. But it was too late. The associate to her right had seen it. The VP across from her had seen it. "I packed a bag," I said, buttoning my jacket. "The lawyer will contact you on Monday. Don't come to the hotel. And don't worry about the check. I'm sure the company card covers entertainment." "Mark, wait! No, you don't understand." Elena scrambled up, her chair screeching horribly against the polished floor. She grabbed my sleeve. Her grip was desperate, her nails digging into the fabric. "It's not... We can explain..." I looked at her hand on my arm as if it were a foreign object, a spider I needed to brush off. I gently, firmly peeled her fingers away one by one. "I understand perfectly," I said. "I'm just the string, remember? And I just let go." I turned my back on her. "Mark!" she screamed. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a shriek that turned every head in Lukuku. "Mark, get back here!" I didn't stop. I walked through the dining room, past the stunned hostess, past the coat check. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the cool Chicago night. It had started to rain. The cold water hit my face, mixing with the heat of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Behind me, the muffled chaos of the restaurant faded. I didn't look back at the window. I didn't check my phone. I walked to the curb, raised my hand for a taxi, and for the first time in a decade, I didn't know where I was going next. And it felt like the first breath of air I'd taken in years. The taxi smelled of stale cherry air freshener and wet wool. It was a mundane sensory detail, but it was the only thing anchoring me to reality as the city lights blurred into streaks of neon rain against the window. My hands were shaking. Not a subtle tremor, but a violent, uncontrollable vibration that started in my fingertips and rattled all the way up to my shoulders. "Where to, pal?" the driver asked, eyeing me in the rearview mirror. He probably saw a man in a damp suit, staring at nothing, looking like he just witnessed a murder or committed one. In a way, I had done both. I had murdered my marriage in cold blood, right between the appetizer and the entree. "The Drake," I said automatically, then stopped. No. Elena knew I liked the Drake. We had stayed there for our 5th anniversary, back when she still looked at me with something other than contempt. "No. Take me to the Hyatt near the river. The big one." "You got it." I leaned my head back against the cracked vinyl seat. My pocket buzzed. Then again. Then a long, sustained vibration that signaled a call. I didn't reach for it. I let it buzz against my thigh like an angry insect. I knew who it was. The persistence was purely Elena. When she wanted something, she didn't stop until she got it. Right now, she wanted damage control. She wanted to twist the narrative before the appetizers were even cleared away. The ride took 20 minutes, but it felt like 20 seconds. The adrenaline that had propelled me out of the restaurant was beginning to drain away, leaving behind a cold, hollow exhaustion. I paid the driver in cash, a crisp $50 bill I had withdrawn earlier that day because I knew I wouldn't want a credit card trail she could track immediately, and stepped out into the hotel turnaround. The lobby was cavernous and indifferent. It was exactly what I needed. Anonymity. I was just another businessman in a suit checking in late. The young woman at the front desk typed on her keyboard with a rhythmic clacking that sounded impossibly loud in my ears. "Checking in for one night?" she asked, not looking up. "Indefinitely," I said. My voice sounded raspy, foreign. "Start with 3 nights. I might extend." "ID and credit card, please." I handed over my personal card, the one account we didn't share. I had opened it 6 months ago, around the time Elena started working late every Tuesday and Thursday. Foreshadowing, I suppose, or maybe just survival instinct. Key card in hand, I rode the elevator to the 14th floor. The silence in the hallway was thick, muffled by plush, tasteless carpet. Room 1408. I swiped the card, the little green light blinked, and I stepped into the neutral zone. Beige walls, beige curtains, a generic abstract painting of a sailboat above the bed. It was the most beautiful room I had ever seen because Elena wasn't in it. I locked the door and engaged the deadbolt, then the safety latch. Only then did I reach into my pocket and pull out my phone. The screen was lit up with notifications. 14 missed calls from Elena, 3 missed calls from Julian, 2 missed calls from unknown number, and the texts, a scrolling wall of them. Elena, 8:12 p.m. Mark, pick up the phone. Now. Elena, 8:13 p.m. You are making a huge mistake. Elena, 8:15 p.m. It's not what it looked like. That photo is out of context. We were just talking. Elena, 8:20 p.m. You humiliated me. Do you have any idea what you just did to my career? Elena, 8:22 p.m. Mark, please. I love you. We can fix this. Just come home. Elena, 8:28 p.m. Where are you? I read them dispassionately, like I was reading a case study about a dysfunctional couple. The shift from command to denial, to victimhood, to manipulation was textbook Elena. That photo is out of context. I almost laughed, but the sound died in my throat. There is no context for your boss's hand in your hair in the back of a limo at midnight. I pressed the power button on the side of the phone and held it down. The screen went black. The silence that followed was absolute. I walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago River, a black snake winding through the illuminated canyon of the city. I stripped off the wet jacket, the geography teacher jacket, and threw it onto the armchair. Then the tie, then the shirt. I walked into the bathroom and turned the shower on, as hot as it would go. I stood under the scalding water for a long time, letting it beat against my neck, trying to wash off the feeling of the last 2 years. The steam filled the small room, fogging up the mirror. My mind drifted back to earlier that morning, the moment the gun was loaded. I had been in my home office, the small room off the kitchen that Elena called my hobby corner. The house was empty. Elena had left early for a pre-gala strategy meeting, which I now assumed was breakfast with Julian. I had the drone footage on my laptop screen. I had watched the video file 3 times, not out of masochism, but to be sure. To be absolutely certain that I wasn't the jealous, insecure husband she always accused me of being. The drone had been hovering at tree level, originally meant to test a perimeter scan for the library project. I had forgotten to power it down when I went inside to get a glass of water. When I came back, the recording light was blinking. It had captured the Lincoln pulling up. It had captured everything through the sunroof and the side window. I remembered the sound of the printer warming up. Whir, click. Whir, click. The mechanical sound of my life ending. I had selected the clearest frame. I adjusted the contrast to sharpen the shadows. I hit print. Watching that piece of paper slowly emerge from the tray was a surreal experience. It came out in jerky motions. First the top of the car, then Julian's head, then Elena's profile. It took 10 seconds to print, 10 seconds to transform from a suspicion into a verdict. I had held the warm paper in my hands, the ink still tacky, smelling of chemicals. I remembered staring at it and feeling nothing. No rage, no tears, just a cold, heavy certainty. That was the moment the marriage actually ended. Not at the restaurant, not when I walked out. It ended in the quiet hum of a home office, with the smell of printer ink and coffee. I stepped out of the shower and wrapped a towel around my waist. I wiped a circle in the steamed-up mirror and looked at myself. I looked older than 34. My eyes were tired, red-rimmed, but the tension that had lived in my jaw for months, the constant clenching of teeth, the walking on eggshells, was gone. I went back into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. The room was freezing. The air conditioning was blasting, but I didn't turn it down. I needed the cold. It kept me sharp. I saw the hotel notepad on the nightstand. I picked up the cheap ballpoint pen. I needed to get the thoughts out of my head before they started to loop. 1 lawyer, call David first thing Monday. No, email him tonight. 2, bank. Accounts. Freeze the joint checking. Move half the savings. 3, the house. Do I want it? No. Too many ghosts. I stared at the list. It was clinical. It was logistical. It was manageable. I lay back on the starched white sheets, staring at the ceiling. The adrenaline was completely gone now, replaced by a deep, aching grief. Not for Elena. I realized with a start that I hadn't truly liked Elena for a long time, but for the time. 10 years. We had met in grad school. We had eaten ramen on the floor of an empty apartment. We had built a life, and she had traded it for a promotion and a thrill in the back of a Lincoln. A wave of nausea hit me. I rolled over and dry heaved into the trash can by the bed. Nothing came up but bile. My body was finally reacting to the shock. I lay there on my side, shivering, curling into a ball. I thought about the dinner, the look on Julian's face, the way the room went silent. It was a nuclear option. I knew that. I had destroyed her reputation in front of the people she valued most. In her world, perception was reality, and I had shattered the lens. Was it cruel? Yes. Did she deserve it? I closed my eyes and saw the photo again. I heard her voice mocking my clothes, my career, my worth. He's just the rock. He gathers moss. I'm not a rock, I whispered to the empty hotel room. I'm a landslide. I didn't expect to sleep. I thought I would lie there staring at the darkness until dawn. But the exhaustion was total, a physical weight pressing me into the mattress. My brain simply shut down. The last thing I heard before I drifted off was the phantom buzzing of the phone I had turned off, a ghost signal calling out from a life that no longer existed. I woke up at 4 a.m., the kind of abrupt, gasping wakefulness that usually follows a nightmare. But there had been no nightmare. The reality was the nightmare. For a disorienting moment, I stared at the dark, unfamiliar ceiling of the Hyatt room, reaching out instinctively to the other side of the bed. My hand hit the cool, crisp sheet. Empty. The memory of the restaurant crashed down on me, heavy and suffocating. But as I lay there in the blue-black gloom of pre-dawn Chicago, my mind didn't dwell on the explosion at Le Cuckoo. Instead, it drifted back to the fuse, the long, slow-burning fuse that had been sizzling quietly for months, unnoticed, or perhaps ignored, until it blew up in my face. They say you never hear the bullet that kills you. That's a lie in marriages. You hear every shot, you just choose to believe they are blanks. The decay hadn't started with Julian. Julian was just the symptom, the opportunistic infection that takes hold when the immune system is already shot. The real sickness began 6 months ago, on a Tuesday in November. That was the night Elena came home with her promotion. I remembered it vividly. I had made risotto, her favorite, with the expensive saffron I bought from the specialty market. I was stirring the pot, a glass of wine waiting for her, when the front door slammed. Not closed, slammed. She walked into the kitchen, tossing her keys onto the granite island with a clatter that sounded like a gunshot. Her eyes were bright, feverish. She looked like she had just run a marathon or won a war. I got it, she said breathless. VP of Marketing, younger than anyone in the company's history. I had dropped the wooden spoon, rushing over to hug her. Elle, that's incredible. I knew you would. All those late nights. She hugged me back, but there was a stiffness to it, a vibration. She wasn't melting into me like she used to. She was vibrating on a frequency I couldn't reach. She pulled away quickly, reaching for the wine I had poured. She downed half of it in one swallow. Julian fought for me, she said, wiping her lip. The board wanted someone with more gray hair, but Julian told them they needed a shark, not a dinosaur. He said, I was the only one with the killer instinct. Killer instinct. It was a phrase she repeated 3 times that night. We went out to celebrate, skipping the risotto. Over dinner, she spent 2 hours talking about the restructure she was planning, the people she was going to fire, the dead weight she needed to cut. I listened, smiling, proud of her. I didn't realize then that I was being categorized. I didn't know that in her new world, there were only 2 types of people, sharks and deadweight. And I, with my quiet architecture job, my love for old jazz records, and my content weekends at home, was definitely not a shark. The change was subtle at first, a gradual erosion of the soft edges that made her Elena. It started with the clothes. About a month after the promotion, she came into the bedroom while I was getting dressed for a client meeting. I was wearing a gray cardigan and slacks, standard attire for meeting with a residential client. "You're wearing that?" she asked. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. I looked in the mirror. "Yeah, it's comfortable. Mrs. Gable doesn't care about fashion. She cares about her sunroom." Elena sighed, a sharp exhalation through her nose that would become the soundtrack of our remaining months together. She walked over, adjusted my collar, and patted my chest with a condescending pity that made my skin crawl. "You look like Mr. Rogers, Mark. It's sweet, I guess. But it's just so safe. Don't you ever want to command a room?" "I don't need to command the room, Elle. I just need to design the room." She rolled her eyes and turned away. "That's exactly what I mean. You're happy just being part of the scenery." That was the first cut. Part of the scenery. Over the next few months, the cuts became deeper, more frequent, and always delivered with a smile or a laugh, especially when we were around others. That was the most painful part. The audience. We went to a Christmas party at her firm. It was my first introduction to the inner circle. That was when I met Julian properly. He was tall, silver-haired, and possessed the kind of easy, predatory charm that comes from having 8 figures in the bank. "So this is the famous Mark," Julian had said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm, testing. He looked me up and down, cataloging my worth in 3 seconds and dismissing it in 2. "Elena tells me you design houses. That must be nice. Very domestic." "I'm an architect," I corrected gently. "Commercial and residential." Right. Julian waved a hand, dismissing the nuance. He turned his back to me, physically cutting me out of the circle, and focused entirely on Elena. "Did you see the numbers from the Asia-Pacific rollout? You were right about the branding shift. Ruthless. I loved it." I stood there, holding my lukewarm beer, watching my wife glow under his praise. She didn't try to include me. She didn't step back to open the circle. She leaned in. She mirrored his body language. She laughed at jokes that weren't funny. I saw it then, though I refused to admit it to myself. She looked at him the way she used to look at me 10 years ago, with awe, with hunger. On the ride home, I tried to bring it up. "Julian seems intense," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "He's a visionary," Elena snapped, scrolling through emails on her phone. The blue light illuminated her face, making her look cold, distant. "He demands excellence. He challenges me, Mark. He pushes me to be better." "I challenge you, don't I?" She stopped scrolling. She looked at me across the center console of the car, and for a second her mask slipped. There was no affection in her eyes, only a dull disappointment. "You comfort me, Mark. You don't challenge me. You're safe. You're the harbor, not the storm. And right now, I love the storm." Safe. Ideally, that should be a compliment. In a marriage, safety is trust. Safety is reliability. But in Elena's mouth, safe became a dirty word. It became a synonym for boring, for stagnant, for weak. The dynamic shifted rapidly after that night. I became the work widow, except my wife wasn't dead. She was just married to the job. And the job's name was Julian. Dates were canceled last minute. Emergency strategy session. Late dinner with the client. I stopped fighting it. I stopped asking questions because I was afraid of the answers. I retreated into my own work, into the silence of our empty house. I became the ghost she treated me as. But the worst part wasn't the absence. It was the presence. When she was home, she was critical of everything. The way I chewed, the shows I watched, the way I breathed. One evening in February, I was working on the blueprints for the community library, the project she would later mock at the gala. I was proud of it. It was pro bono work for an underserved neighborhood. Elena walked into my office, barely glancing at the intricate rendering on my screen. "I need you to pick up my dry cleaning tomorrow," she said, dropping a ticket on my desk. "I can't tomorrow morning, Elle. I have a site visit at the library. The foundation is being poured." She stopped at the door, turning back with a look of genuine confusion. "The library? Mark, honestly, you spend so much time on that charity case. Imagine if you put that energy into something that actually paid, something that mattered." "It matters to the community," I said, feeling my temper flare. "It matters to nobody who counts," she retorted. "It's small thinking, Mark. You're satisfied with crumbs. Julian just closed a deal with Netflix. That's legacy. This," she gestured vaguely at my screen, "this is a hobby." She walked out, leaving the word hanging in the air. Hobby. My career, my passion, my contribution to the world, reduced to a cute little pastime to keep the house husband busy while the adults did business. That was when I started to hate her. Just a little. A small, hard seed of resentment planted deep in my gut. I didn't suspect the affair yet. I just thought she had fallen out of love with me and in love with herself. I thought she was high on the fumes of corporate power. I told myself it was a phase. I told myself if I just supported her, if I was the rock she claimed to need, she would eventually come down from the high and see me again. I was a fool. I was the steady, reliable fool. The week before the dinner at Le Coucou, the atmosphere in the house had changed again. The hostility smoothed out into a strange, guilty sweetness. She bought me a watch. Not a style I liked, but expensive. She suggested we go away for a weekend in the summer. It was the guilt tax. She was paying me off for what she was doing in the dark. I lay in the hotel bed, staring at the sunrise bleeding gray light through the curtains. I realized now that the geography teacher comment at the dinner wasn't a joke. It wasn't teasing. It was her way of publicly distancing herself from me. By mocking me, she was signaling to Julian and everyone else, I am not with him. I have outgrown him. I am available. She hadn't just cheated on me with her body. She had cheated on our history. She had taken the man who supported her through grad school, who paid the bills when she was an unpaid intern, who held her hair back when she had the flu, and she had turned him into a punchline to impress a room full of strangers. I sat up in bed, the sheets falling away. The sadness was evaporating, burned off by the rising sun. In its place, the cold clarity returned. I wasn't the harbor anymore, and she was about to find out what happens when the storm hits the shore without a breakwater. I picked up the hotel phone. I didn't dial my voicemail. I dialed the front desk. "This is room 1408, I said. "I need to extend my stay, and I need the number for a courier service. I have a package to send." The photo on the table at the restaurant was just the opening statement. It was time to present the rest of the evidence. Catastrophe rarely announces itself with a drum roll. In movies, the discovery of an affair is always dramatic. A lipstick stain on a collar, a stranger knocking on the door, a hired private investigator handing over a manila envelope in a rainy alley. In reality, it is usually quiet, stupid, and banal. It happens while you are doing laundry or paying bills, or, in my case, trying to find a recipe for roasted chicken. It was Sunday, 5 days before the dinner at Le Coucou. Elena was out. The official narrative was a branding workshop with the creative team. I hadn't questioned it. By that point, I had stopped questioning her schedule because the answers always made me feel small and intrusive. I was at home, enjoying the rare solitude, planning to make a Sunday roast, a tradition we used to share before. She became too busy for traditions. I needed the recipe I had saved years ago. I knew it was bookmarked on the old family iPad, the one with the cracked screen that we kept in the kitchen drawer for music and cooking. I pulled it out, blew the dust off the cover, and plugged it in. It had been dead for weeks. As the battery icon turned from red to green and the Apple logo appeared, The device automatically connected to the Wi-Fi. It began its background rituals, updating apps, refreshing emails, and syncing the cloud. I didn't think twice about it. We shared an iCloud account for purchased apps and storage. It was a relic of our early marriage, a symbol of the transparency we supposedly had. "What's mine is yours," we used to say. I opened the browser to find the chicken recipe, but the device was sluggish, bogged down by the influx of data downloading in the background. A notification banner slid down from the top of the screen. Photos, 423 items downloaded. Frowned. That seemed like a lot. I tapped the Photos app, intending to clear up some space so the browser would run faster. The screen filled with thumbnails. At first, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. It was a cognitive dissonance so violent it felt like physical vertigo. I saw pictures of places I hadn't been, a hotel room with a view of the frantic Tokyo skyline, a plate of oysters at a restaurant in Chelsea, a selfie of Elena in a bathroom mirror I didn't recognize, wearing black lingerie I had never seen. My finger hovered over the glass. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt very thin. The smell of the rosemary I had been chopping seemed overwhelming, nauseating. I scrolled up. There was Julian. It wasn't a scandalous photo at first glance. It was a candid shot of him sitting across a table, laughing, holding a glass of scotch. But the caption, burned into the metadata of the live photo, played a snippet of audio. Elena's voice, "God, you're beautiful when you win." I felt a cold sweat break out on my hairline. My heart started to hammer against my ribs, a erratic, terrified rhythm. I shouldn't look. I should turn it off. I should respect her privacy. The pathetic, conditioned reflex of a good husband tried to stop me. But the architect in me, the man who needs to see the structure, the foundation, the load-bearing walls, took over. I needed to know the dimensions of the collapse. I sat down on the kitchen stool, the cracked iPad resting on the granite counter, and I scrolled through the archives of my wife's secret life. It wasn't just a fling. It wasn't a drunken mistake after a holiday party. It was a parallel existence. I saw timestamps dating back 6 months. November, a business trip to Boston. The photos showed a bed and breakfast in Vermont. December, the night of her company Christmas party. There was a photo of them in the back of a car, hands intertwined. January, a video. Just 10 seconds. Elena dancing in a hotel room, tipsy, laughing, twirling for the camera. The voice behind the camera was Julian's. "My muse," he said, and she looked at the lens with a look of adoration she hadn't given me in 5 years. I watched that video 4 times. Each time, a little more of Mark, the loving husband, died. The text messages were synced too. The iPad, in its helpful, mindless efficiency, had downloaded her iMessage history because she hadn't turned off the text message forwarding on her new iPhone. I read them. I shouldn't have, but I did. Julian, he suspects nothing. He's too comfortable. Elena, he's not suspicious. He's just there, like furniture. I feel guilty sometimes, but then I look at you and I remember what passion feels like. Julian, leave him. You're a VP now. You need a partner, not a dependent. Elena, soon, after the gala, I don't want the drama to overshadow my promotion. Furniture, dependent. I put the iPad down. I walked to the sink and splashed cold water on my face. I looked out the window at the backyard I had landscaped for her, the gazebo I had built with my own hands because she said she wanted a place to read in the summer. She was going to leave me. That was the plan. She was just waiting for the most convenient time for her career. I was a scheduling conflict to be resolved after Q1. The front door opened. "Honey, I'm home." Her voice was cheerful, light, the voice of a woman who had just had a lovely workshop. Panic, sharp and primal, seized me. I looked at the iPad. I quickly closed the cover and shoved it under a stack of mail. My hands were shaking so badly I almost knocked over the vase of flowers. Elena walked into the kitchen. She looked flushed, happy. Her hair was slightly mussed. "Oh, something smells herby," she said, wrinkling her nose. She walked over to me. This was the test. the first second of the rest of my life. She leaned in to kiss me. I smelled it. Beneath her expensive perfume, beneath the mint of a breath strip, I smelled the faint, musky scent of another man's cologne. It was subtle, but to my heightened senses it reeked like toxic waste. I forced myself not to recoil. I forced my lips to touch hers. It was like kissing a corpse. "Hey," I said. My voice sounded hollow to me, but she didn't notice. She never noticed. "How was the workshop?" "Exhausting," she sighed, pouring herself a glass of water. "Brainstorming for 6 hours. My head is pounding. Julian was relentless with the drills." "Liar, liar, liar." "Well, sit down," I said, turning back to the counter so she wouldn't see my eyes. "I'll make you some tea." The next 5 days were a blur of psychological torture. I was living with a stranger who wore my wife's face. Every time she looked at her phone and smiled, I knew. Every time she went to the bathroom to take a call, I knew. I became an actor. I played the role of the oblivious, supportive husband perfectly. I asked about her day. I ironed her shirts. I listened to her talk about the upcoming gala dinner at Le Coucou, nodding when she complained about the seating chart. "It has to be perfect, Mark," she said on Tuesday night, pacing the bedroom. "This is my coronation. Julian is inviting the investors. I need you to be charming, but not too talkative. You know?" "I know," I said. "I'll be the perfect accessory." She missed the sarcasm. She just nodded. "Exactly. Just support me." But while I was acting, I was also planning. The iPad photos were damaging, but they were private. They were he said, she said. They were emotional. I needed something visceral, something undeniable, something that would work in a loud restaurant. I remembered the text about him picking her up. Julian. "I'll swing by at 11:30. Wait for the light." Wednesday night. She told me she had a late conference call and would take it in the study downstairs. I went to bed. I went to early, or pretended to. At 11:15 p.m., I heard the front door click open softly. I was already in my office. The lights off, the blackout curtains drawn. I powered up the drone. It was a high-end model I used for site surveys, equipped with a 4K night vision camera. I didn't fly it high. I hovered it just above the oak tree in the front yard, silent and invisible in the darkness. At 11:30 p.m., the Lincoln pulled up. I watched the screen of the controller. I saw her run out to the car. I saw the door open. I saw her slide in. I maneuvered the drone lower, angling the camera through the sunroof and the side window, where the privacy tint was less effective against the specific ISO setting of the lens. I saw everything. It wasn't just proof. It was ammunition. I took the still frame, the one that captured the exact moment of betrayal in high definition. The next morning, Thursday, I went to the print shop. I didn't use the home printer for the final copy. I wanted photo quality gloss. I wanted it to shine under the restaurant lights. Now, standing in the kitchen on Sunday afternoon, looking at the back of her head as she drank her water, I realized something terrifying. I didn't love her anymore. The grief hadn't hit yet, only a cold, hard resolve. She wanted to discard me like furniture. Fine, but furniture is heavy, and when it falls on you, it breaks bones. "Mark?" she asked, turning around. "You're staring at me. Is there something on my face?" I smiled. It was the best acting performance of my career. "No, Elle," I said softly. "I was just thinking about how much you deserve this dinner. It's going to be a night you'll never forget." She beamed, basking in the praise, completely unaware that she was looking into the eyes of her executioner. Monday morning arrived not with a burst of sunlight, but with the gray, muted oppression of a Chicago overcast sky. The light filtering through the hotel shears was weak, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the stagnant air of room 1408. I had slept for 4 hours, a dreamless, black void of unconsciousness, and woke up with the mental clarity of a man on death row who had just received a stay of execution. I sat up, the hotel sheets pulling around my waist. The room was silent, hermetically sealed from the city outside. On the nightstand, my phone sat like an unexploded ordnance. I reached for it. It was time. I held the power button. The screen glowed to life, the white Apple logo appearing against the black background. As soon as the operating system loaded, the device began to convulse. It vibrated violently against the wood of the table, a continuous, angry buzz that lasted for nearly a full minute. 47 missed calls, 82 text messages, 11 voicemails. I didn't open the texts. Reading them would be engaging in a dialogue I had no intention of having. Instead, I accessed the voicemail. I needed to gauge her state of mind, not for emotional reasons, but for tactical ones. I pressed play on the speakerphone and set the device down on the bedspread. Beep. Mark, this is insane. Elena's voice. 9:43 p.m. last night. She sounded breathless, likely calling from the back seat of a getaway car. You need to answer me right now. Everyone is talking. You can't just drop a bomb like that and leave. We need to issue a statement. Call me. Beep. Mark, pick up. 10:15 p.m. Her tone had shifted from command to accusation. You think you're so righteous? You embarrassed me in front of the entire board, in front of the investors. Do you have any idea how hard I worked for this night? You're selfish. You've always been jealous of my success, and this proves it. Beep. Mark. 2:30 a.m. Her voice was slurred. Whine. I didn't mean it. The photo, it wasn't what you think. We were just celebrating. It was a moment of weakness. It didn't mean anything. You know I love you. Please, baby, come home. The house is empty without you. I stopped listening. The progression was textbook. Denial, anger, blame shifting, bargaining. She was cycling through the stages of grief, but she wasn't grieving our marriage. She was grieving her reputation. I deleted the messages. I didn't save them. I already had the only evidence I needed printed on high-gloss paper and currently resting in the center of a table at Le Cuckoo, likely in a trash bag by now, but burned into the retinas of 30 witnesses. I dialed a number I had saved weeks ago but never used. David Sorrell, attorney at law. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. David, it's Mark. Mark Evans. Mark! David's tone shifted instantly from professional to alert. We had played squash together for years, but I had only consulted him legally once, regarding a property dispute. I saw the news. The news? I asked, frowning. It's on the industry blogs, Mark. Gala dinner meltdown. No names mentioned explicitly yet, but the rumors are flying. People are saying the VP's husband walked out after dropping a nuke. I assume that was you. It was, I said. I need to file, David. Today. Irreconcilable differences. Adultery. Okay, David said, the sound of a pen scratching on paper coming through the line. Where are you? A hotel. I'm going back to the house now to get my things while she's at the office. She usually has a Monday morning stand-up at 9. Make it quick, David advised, his voice dropping an octave. Do not engage. If she's there, do not speak to her without recording it. If she gets litigious, she might try to claim domestic disturbance to get leverage on the assets. Get your passport, your financial records, and get out. I'll have the papers drafted by noon. Thanks, David. I hung up, dressed in the same suit from the night before, now wrinkled and smelling faintly of stale wine and rain, and checked out of the hotel. The drive to the suburbs was surreal. I passed the familiar landmarks, the dry cleaner, the Italian deli where we bought prosciutto, the park where we used to run. They looked like movie sets from a film I had finished watching. They belonged to a character named Mark the husband, and that character had been written out of the script. I pulled into the driveway of our colonial-style house at 10:15 a.m. Elena's Audi was gone. The garage door was closed. Perfect. I entered through the garage, keying in the code. The house smelled of lavender and floor wax. It was pristine, cold. It looked like a model home, not a place where people lived. I walked through the kitchen, ignoring the memories of Sunday breakfasts and midnight snacks. I went straight to the stairs. I had brought 2 large duffel bags. I moved with military efficiency. In the study, my laptop, the external hard drives containing my architectural portfolio, the deed to the house, which I found in the safe, my birth certificate, in the bedroom, clothes, not everything, just the essentials, suits, jeans, sweaters. I left the watch she gave me on the dresser. I left the wedding ring next to it. I was zipping up the second bag when I heard it, The sound of the front door opening downstairs. I froze. My heart gave a single, painful thump against my ribs. She was supposed to be at work. She was supposed to be doing damage control at the office. Mark? Her voice drifted up the stairs. It wasn't the screaming voice from the voicemail. It was soft, tentative. I didn't answer. I grabbed the handles of the bags and walked out of the bedroom to the landing. She was standing in the foyer, looking up. She wasn't wearing her power suit. She was wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Her face was devoid of makeup, and her eyes were swollen. She looked smaller than I remembered. Vulnerable. It was a trap. I knew it was a trap. "You came back," she said, a flicker of hope crossing her face. She took a step toward the stairs. "I came for my things," I said. My voice was calm, flat. I started descending the stairs, the heavy bags thumping against my legs. "Mark, please," she said, rushing to the bottom of the steps to block my path. "We need to talk. You can't just end 10 years like this. Over a picture." I stopped 3 steps from the bottom. I looked down at her. "It wasn't just a picture, Elena. It was the disrespect. It was the months of you treating me like an accessory. The picture was just the period at the end of the sentence." "I was stressed," she cried, her hands reaching out to grab the banister, creating a barrier. "The promotion, the pressure from Julian. You don't understand what it's like at that level. I needed an outlet. I made a mistake. I admit it. I made a horrible mistake. But I can fix it. I'll quit. I'll tell Julian to go to hell. We can go to therapy." I looked at her hands, white-knuckled on the wood. "You're not sorry you did it, Elena. You're sorry you got caught publicly. If I had found out privately, you would be gaslighting me right now, telling me I'm crazy and jealous." Her face hardened instantly. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the sharp, angular cruelty I had seen at the dinner. "Don't psychoanalyze me, Mark. You're not that smart." She let go of the banister and crossed her arms. "You think you're the victim? You humiliated me. Julian is threatening to fire me because of the scene you caused. You destroyed my career because your fragile ego couldn't handle your wife being successful." There it was, the truth. "I didn't destroy your career," I said, stepping past her. "You did that when you decided to sleep with the boss in a company car. I just turned on the lights." "I will ruin you," she hissed as I walked toward the door. "If you file for divorce, I will take everything. The house, the accounts, your little architecture firm. I have better lawyers than you, Mark. I have Julian's lawyers." I stopped at the door. The threat hung in the air, toxic and heavy. I turned around slowly. "You can have the house, Elena. It's full of rot anyway. You can have the money, but you can't have my dignity. Not anymore." "You're walking out on your family," she screamed, her voice cracking. "I am your family." "No," I said, opening the door to the gray morning light. "You're just a stranger I used to know." I walked out. "Mark," she followed me onto the porch. "Mark, don't you dare walk away from me. I'm talking to you." I threw the bags into the trunk of my car. I didn't look back. I got into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw her in the rearview mirror. She wasn't chasing me. She was standing on the porch of the beautiful, expensive house we had bought together, her arms wrapped around herself, looking small and terrified. She pulled out her phone and started dialing. I watched her for a second longer, then shifted gears and drove away. I drove for 2 miles before I pulled over into a gas station parking lot. My hands were shaking again. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, forcing myself to breathe. In, out, in, out. I had survived the confrontation. I had retrieved the hard drives. I was free. But as I sat there watching the mundane flow of traffic on the suburban road, I realized the war hadn't ended. It had just begun. Elena had invoked Julian's lawyers. She had threatened to destroy me. She thought I was weak. She thought I would roll over to save the peace. I reached into the passenger seat and picked up my laptop bag. I unzipped the side pocket and pulled out a small silver flash drive. It wasn't the photos. It was something else I had found on the iPad. Something buried deep in the deleted folder of her email that she hadn't emptied. Financial documents. Emails between Julian and an offshore consulting firm. She was right about one thing. I wasn't a shark, but I was an architect. I knew that if you pull the right brick, the whole building comes down. I put the car in drive. I wasn't going back to the hotel. I was going to David's office, and I was bringing the rest of the ammunition. David's office smelled of old leather and expensive coffee, a sharp contrast to the antiseptic scent of the hotel room I had left behind. I sat in a wingback chair, watching my lawyer read through the printed screenshots of the text messages and the financial emails I had extracted. Outside the window, the Chicago skyline stood gray and indifferent, a monolith of steel and glass that didn't care about broken marriages. "She's moving fast," David said, sliding a printed page across the mahogany desk toward me. He didn't look at the financial documents yet. He was focused on the social fallout. "This was posted an hour ago." I looked at the paper. It was a screenshot of a Facebook post from Elena's personal account. The privacy settings were restricted to friends only, but in our circle, that meant about 400 people, including half the industry. The post was a masterclass in vague victimhood. There was no photo of her, just a picture of a stormy ocean. Cliché, but effective. The caption read, "Sometimes the people we support the most are the ones who resent our wings. It's heartbreaking to realize that your safety net was actually a cage. Taking some time to heal and reevaluate what love really means. Please respect our privacy as we navigate this difficult transition." "She's spinning it," I said, my voice flat. "She's making it sound like I was holding her back, like I was controlling." "It's the jealous husband defense," David nodded, leaning back. "It's smart. She can't deny the affair completely. Because she knows you have the photo, so she's contextualizing it. She's laying the groundwork to say that the marriage was emotionally abusive or stifling, and she sought comfort elsewhere. She's trying to make the infidelity look like a symptom of a bad marriage, not the cause of its end." I felt a flash of heat in my chest. I cooked her dinner. I supported her career. I built her a damn gazebo. "None of that matters in the court of public opinion, Mark," David warned, his eyes sharp. "Right now, there are two wars happening. There's the legal war, which we will win because we have the evidence. And there's the narrative war, which you are currently losing because you aren't fighting." "So what do I do? Post the photo of her and Julian on Instagram?" "Absolutely not," David snapped. "That's revenge porn litigation waiting to happen. It makes you look unstable and vindictive. No, the strategy here is gray rock. You become boring. You become impenetrable. You do not post. You do not comment. You do not defend yourself to mutual friends who call just to check in. Let her scream into the void. The more she talks, the more she'll contradict herself. Silence is the loudest noise you can make right now." I left David's office an hour later with strict instructions. Complete radio silence. But silence is heavy. I checked into a new place, a furnished apartment in the West Loop, arranged by David's firm. It was clean, modern, and utterly soulless. It was a place for people in transition, for corporate nomads and divorced men. I sat on the gray couch and made the mistake of turning my phone back on. I hadn't blocked everyone yet. I needed to see who was loyal. The answer, it turned out, was almost no one. The messages began to trickle in, a slow poison. Sarah, Elena's college roommate. "Mark, I saw Elena's post. I'm so confused. She sounds devastated. Did you really leave her without talking? That seems so harsh." Mike, my best friend from grad school. "Hey man, heard things went down at the gala. Elena called me. She's a mess. She says you humiliated her in front of Julian. Look, I know things get heated, but maybe you guys should cool off before you do anything permanent." I stared at Mike's text. Mike and who had sat on my porch drinking my beer while I complained about Elena's late nights. Mike, who I thought saw through her facade. Elena had gotten to him first. She had wept on the phone, played the broken woman card, and Mike, ever the knight in shining armor, had bought it wholesale. I didn't reply. I blocked Mike, then Sarah, then the Tomlinsons, then the Davises. With every blocked number, my world shrank. It was a physical sensation, like the walls of the apartment were closing in. These were people I had spent Christmases with, people I had traveled with, and in the span of 24 hours, they had rewritten history based on a Facebook post and a tearful phone call. My phone rang. It was my mother. I hesitated. Elena would have called her. I knew it. Elena knew my mother was my soft spot. Hello, Mark. My mother's voice was trembling. Elena called me. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said you moved out. She said you accused her of things. I didn't accuse her of anything, Mom. I showed her proof. She said it was a misunderstanding, my mother continued, her voice pleading. She said you've been under a lot of stress with work lately, and you snapped. Mark, honey, marriage is hard. Your father and I went through rough patches. You don't just walk away. She is sleeping with her boss, Mom, I said, cutting through her plea with brutal efficiency. I have photos, I have texts. It's not stress, it's adultery. There was a long silence on the other end. My mother belonged to a generation where you fix things, even if they were broken beyond repair. But the word adultery carried a weight she couldn't ignore. Oh, she whispered. I'm going to be okay, I said, softening my tone. But I need you to not listen to her. She is trying to manipulate you to get to me. Please just trust me. I trust you, Mark, she said, but I could hear the doubt. Elena had been a daughter to her for 10 years. The cognitive dissonance was tearing her apart too. I hung up and threw the phone onto the cushion. The isolation was total. I was a man on an island, watching the mainland burn. I walked to the window of the apartment. Below, the city moved on. People were walking dogs, carrying groceries, rushing to meetings. They had no idea that in this room, a life had just been surgically removed. I decided to go for a walk. I needed air. I needed to not be in the box. I walked toward a coffee shop a few blocks away. I pulled my cap down low, irrationally worried that someone would recognize me from the non-existent news reports. As I stood in a line waiting for a black coffee, I heard a familiar laugh. My blood ran cold. Two women were sitting at a table near the window. I recognized one of them instantly. It was Jessica, the wife of one of the partners at Elena's firm. She was a gossip monger of the highest order, the kind of woman who traded secrets like currency. I turned my back, pretending to study the menu board, but I strained my ears. Totally insane, Jessica was saying, her voice lowered but caring. Elena said he had a mental break. Apparently, he's been paranoid for months, checking her phone, stalking her. She said the photo he claimed to have was just her and Julian talking in a car after a meeting. She's terrified of him. That's so scary, the other woman gasped. He seems so quiet. It's always the quiet ones, Jessica said knowingly. Julian is furious, of course. He's standing by her. He said they're going to get a restraining order if Mark comes near the office. I gripped the edge of the counter. My knuckles turned white. Restraining order. Paranoid. Stalking. She wasn't just spinning the narrative. She was criminalizing me. She was taking my investigation, the drone, the iPad discovery, and framing it as the actions of a deranged stalker. It was brilliant. It was evil. And it was working. If I tried to defend myself now, if I showed the photo to anyone, it would just prove her point. See? He's obsessed. He's tracking us. I grabbed my coffee when the barista called my name and walked out. I didn't look at Jessica. I didn't confront her. I walked back to the apartment in a daze. The anger I had felt earlier was replaced by a cold dread. I wasn't fighting a divorce. I was fighting for my sanity. Elena was trying to gaslight the entire world. I sat down at the small dining table and opened my laptop. I plugged in the flash drive I had taken from the house, the one with the financial dirt. I hadn't looked at the files closely yet. I had just grabbed the folder named Consulting from her deleted items. I opened the first PDF. It was an invoice. Consultant, Julian Vance. Client, a shell company in the Caymans. Service, marketing strategy. Amount, $50,000. I opened another and another. Dates matched, amounts varied. But the pattern was clear. Julian was funneling money out of the company through bogus consulting fees, and Elena was signing off on the invoices as the VP of marketing. She wasn't just sleeping with him, she was laundering money for him. I sat back, the glow of the screen illuminating my face in the darkening room. The narrative war outside was loud. Elena was winning the battle of who is the victim. She had the tears, the social capital, and the lies. but I looked at the spreadsheet on my screen. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't he said, she said. This was a felony. Let her have the friends. Let her have the sympathy of the country club set. Let her paint me as the jealous, crazy husband. I wasn't going to fight her on Facebook. I was going to fight her in federal court. My phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. Unknown, we need to talk. Now. Jay's wife. I stared at the screen. Julian's wife. The fourth player in this tragedy. The woman who had been invisible until this moment. I didn't reply immediately. I took a sip of the coffee. It was cold and bitter. The isolation was ending. The alliances were shifting. I picked up the phone and typed 2 words. When? Where? The meeting point was not a dark alley, but the tea room at the Peninsula Hotel. It was a place of aggressive civility, where the clinking of porcelain and the murmur of polite conversation created a white noise that suffocated secrets. I arrived 10 minutes early, but she was already there. Victoria Vance looked exactly as I expected, impeccable, icy, and armored in Chanel. She was older than Julian by perhaps 5 years, a woman who came from the kind of Chicago money that had streets named after it. She sat with a posture so rigid it looked painful, her hands folded around a cup of Earl Grey. She didn't look like a scorned wife. She looked like a CEO waiting for a quarterly report. I approached the table. She didn't stand. She simply gestured to the empty chair opposite her with a slight inclination of her head. "Mr. Evans," she said. Her voice was low, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Mrs. Vance," I replied, sitting down. I felt underdressed in my off-the-rack suit, the only one I had packed that wasn't wrinkled. "I assume you've seen the photo." "I haven't seen it," she corrected, taking a small sip of tea. "But I have heard about it. Julian described it to me in vivid detail while trying to explain why his vice president's husband caused a scene that is currently being discussed in boardrooms from here to New York." She placed the cup down. The china made a sharp clack against the saucer. "I don't care about the sex, Mr. Evans," she said, looking me directly in the eyes. Her eyes were a pale, watery blue, sharp as cut glass. "Julian has had dalliances before. I tolerate them as long as they are discreet, as long as they do not embarrass me or the family trust. But this is not a dalliance. This is a liability." "I didn't intend to hurt you," I said, and I meant it. In my rage at Elena, I hadn't thought about the woman sitting across from me. "Intention is irrelevant. Impact is what matters," she said. "Julian is in the middle of a merger with a European conglomerate. The deal is worth $400 million. It closes in 2 weeks. A scandal involving the CEO sleeping with a subordinate he just promoted, is not just gossip. It's cause for a vote of no confidence. It triggers morality clauses in the contracts. You didn't just throw a drink in your wife's face, Mr. Evans. You threw a grenade into a bank vault." I sat back, the weight of her words settling on me. I had wanted to hurt Elena. I had wanted to bruise Julian's ego. I hadn't realized I was destabilizing a 9-figure corporate deal. "So, what do you want?" I asked. "You want me to recant? Say it was a misunderstanding?" "Elena is already trying that narrative. It won't work." "No," Victoria said, her lips thinning into a grim line. "I don't want you to recant. I want to know what else you have." I froze. "Excuse me?" "Julian is panicked," she explained, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He's not panicked about a photo of a kiss or a grope in a car. He can spin that. He can pay people off. But he's terrified of something else. I know my husband. He has the look of a man who is afraid of prison, not just divorce court. So I am asking you, as one victim to another, what else do you know?" I looked at her. I saw the desperation hidden behind the diamonds. She wasn't here to save her marriage. She was here to save her assets. If Julian went down for something criminal, her life, her standing, her children's inheritance, it all went down with him. I thought about the flash drive in my pocket, the invoices, the embezzlement. If I gave it to her, she would use it to destroy him on her terms. She would likely force him to resign, secure her settlement, and bury the evidence to protect the company's stock. Elena would be collateral damage, fired, scapegoated, and likely facing legal action alone, while Julian hid behind his wife's lawyers. I have financial records, I said softly. Victoria didn't blink, but her knuckles whitened around her teacup. Show me. I pulled out my phone. I had taken photos of the invoices on the screen. I slid the phone across the table. She looked at the image. She swiped to the next one, and the next. Her expression didn't change, but the color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a marble statue. Shell companies, she whispered. He's skimming from the marketing budget. That idiot. She looked up at me, and for the first time, there was fear in her eyes. Elena signed these. Yes, I said. She's the VP. Her signature is on every invoice. Then she's going to jail, Victoria stated flatly. Julian will claim she orchestrated it. He'll say he was just a rubber stamp. He'll feed her to the wolves to save himself. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I hated Elena. I hated what she had done to us. But the thought of her in federal prison, manipulated by Julian into signing fraudulent documents, then framed for his crime, made me feel sick. It was one thing to leave her. It was another to watch her life be completely incinerated. He can't claim ignorance, I said. I have emails where he directs her to do it. Victoria pushed the phone back to me. Keep those. Do not release them. Not yet. Why? Because if this comes out today, the stock plummets and I lose half my net worth, she hissed. I need time. I need to divest. I need to structure the divorce so that his debts don't become my debts. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. You give me 3 days, Mr. Evans. 3 days of silence. In exchange, I will hand you Julian on a silver platter. I will make sure he doesn't destroy Elena completely. I'll make sure the blame falls where it belongs, on him. And if I don't wait, then I will unleash a legal team that will make your wife's threat look like child's play. I will bury you in litigation until you are designing dog houses for a living. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. 3 days. Do we have a deal? I looked at the card. Victoria Vance, philanthropist. 3 days, I agreed. She nodded once, turned, and walked out of the tea room, leaving me with a cooling pot of Earl Grey and a conscience that felt heavier by the second. I left the hotel and walked out into the busy Michigan Avenue crowds. The city felt different now. Before, I was a man with a broken heart. Now, I was a man holding a detonator. I checked my phone. The news had broken. Business Insider, Vance Media shares dip amid rumors of leadership scandal. It wasn't the full story yet, just the tremors before the earthquake. The article mentioned internal discord and rumors of a high-profile exit. I kept walking, aiming for the lakefront. I needed space. My phone buzzed. It was Elena. I stared at the screen. I hadn't spoken to her since I walked out of the house. I shouldn't answer. David had told me not to answer. Victoria had told me to stay silent. But the image of the invoices, her signature scrawled in blue ink, flashed in my mind. She doesn't know. She thinks this is just about sex. She has no idea she's sitting on a landmine of fraud. I answered. Mark? Her voice was small, terrified. Mark, please don't hang up. I'm here. I said, stopping by a concrete railing overlooking the gray water of Lake Michigan. Julian isn't answering my calls, she said, her voice trembling. He told me to stay home today. He said legal is handling it. Mark, I'm scared. I got an email from HR. They locked me out of the server. Elena, I said, my voice steady but lacking the anger from yesterday. Listen to me very carefully. Do not sign anything. Do not talk to Julian's lawyers without your own representation. Why? She cried. It's just an affair. People have affairs. Why are they locking me out? It's not just an affair, I said, breaking the protocol, breaking the silence I promised. It's the invoices, Elena, the consulting fees. There was a silence on the other end, a long, suffocating silence. How do you know about that? She whispered. I know everything, I said. Julian is using you. He's been using you from the start. You weren't a partner, Elena. You were a shield. And now that the arrows are flying, he's going to hide behind you. I heard a sob, not the manipulative cry from the voicemail, but the raw, guttural sound of a reality shattering. What do I do? She asked. Mark, help me. Please. I can't help you, I said. I'm not your husband anymore. I'm the man you mocked at dinner, remember? I'm sorry, she wept. I'm so sorry. Call a criminal defense attorney, I said. Not a divorce lawyer, a criminal one. And tell them about the Cayman accounts. Mark? I hung up. I stood by the lake, the wind whipping my coat around my legs. I felt a strange, hollow sensation in my chest. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't vengeance. It was pity. I had launched the missile to destroy the marriage, to regain my dignity. But I hadn't seen the blast radius. I hadn't seen that it would take down a corporation, a family, and the woman I used to love. I looked at the water. I had 3 days to wait for Victoria to make her move. 3 days of watching the slow-motion car crash I had initiated. I turned away from the lake. I had one more stop to make. If I was going to war with billionaires, I needed to make sure my own fortress was secure. I needed to see my father. He was a retired judge, a man of few words and absolute moral rigidity. I hadn't told him yet. I needed to look him in the eye and ask him if justice was worth the cost of mercy. My father lived in a brownstone in Lincoln Park that smelled of cedarwood, pipe tobacco, and 50 years of legal precedent. He was a retired federal judge, a man who viewed emotion as a procedural error to be stricken from the record. I hadn't visited him in 3 months, mostly because Elena found his house depressing and his conversation interrogational. I sat in his library, the same leather chair I had sat in when I told him I was getting married 10 years ago. He was pouring 2 fingers of scotch into crystal tumblers. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask why I looked like I hadn't slept in 48 hours. He simply set the glass down on the coaster and sat opposite me. David called me, my father said. His voice was gravelly, worn smooth by decades of delivering verdicts. He says you've initiated a scorched earth policy. I didn't start the fire, Dad, I said, taking a sip of the scotch. It burned, a welcome distraction. I just stopped trying to put it out. There is a difference between justice and vengeance, Mark, he said, observing me over the rim of his glasses. Justice seeks balance. Vengeance seeks pain. Which one are you after? I looked at the rows of law books lining the walls. I thought I wanted justice. I wanted the truth to be known. But now I think I just want it to be over. I uncovered something bigger than the affair. Fraud. Embezzlement. My father's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. That was the equivalent of a gasp from anyone else. And I gave it, to Julian's wife, and I warned Elena. He nodded slowly, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. You warned the defendant? She's still my wife, technically, and she's being set up as the fall guy. I hate her for what she did to me, Dad, but I don't want to see her in handcuffs for a crime she was manipulated into committing. That is a dangerous distinction, he warned. In the eyes of the law, a signature is an endorsement of intent. If she signed the invoices, she is liable. Your warning may have given her a head start, or it may have made you an accessory to obstruction if she destroys evidence. I didn't tell her to destroy it. I told her to get a lawyer. My father sighed, a long, heavy sound. You are a good man, Mark. Perhaps too good for the arena you have stepped into. Divorce is not a dissolution of love. It is a dissolution of a corporation. You need to treat it as such. Stop thinking about saving her. She made her choices. You need to focus on what you walk away with. I don't want anything. That is the grief talking, he said sharply. You built that life. You contributed to that equity. Do not let your pride strip you of your assets. I left his house an hour later, the scotch warming my blood, but doing little to thaw the chill in my chest. My father's pragmatism was grounding, but it missed the core of the wound. He saw the marriage as a contract breached. I saw it as a reality that had never existed. The next morning, the legal machinery ground into motion. I was back in David's office. The 3 days of silence I had promised Victoria were holding, but the private legal maneuvering was frantic. Her lawyer sent over a preliminary proposal, David said, sliding a thick document across the desk. They want to settle quickly. They're scared of what you know. They're offering to buy you out of the house. They want you to sign an NDA regarding the circumstances of the separation. In exchange, You get a lump sum of $200,000. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. 200,000? The equity in that house is over $1 million. And an NDA? She wants to buy my silence about the affair? It's a lowball offer, David agreed. Standard opening move. We counter. We ask for 60% of the house, half her 401k, and we refuse the NDA. If they push, we threaten to depose Julian. No, I said. David stopped writing. No? I don't want the house, I said. I don't want the equity. I don't want a payout. Mark, listen to me, David said, taking off his glasses. I know you're emotional, but that house is your primary asset. You designed the renovation. You built the garden. You can't just walk away from $500,000 because you're hurt. It's not because I'm hurt, I said, standing up and walking to the window. It's because that house is a tomb. Every room in that place is a lie. The kitchen where I cooked while she texted him. The living room where we watched movies while she thought about him. If I take that money, I'm taking payment for the time I wasted. I don't want to be paid for my humiliation, David. I want to erase it. This is financial suicide, David warned. I have my own firm, I said. I have my hands. I can build a new house. A real one. Tell them I'll sign the divorce papers today. Uncontested. I waive my claim to the house. I waive spousal support. But I will not sign an NDA. And I want my name off the mortgage and the joint accounts by Friday. Complete severance. A clean break. And the fraud evidence? David asked quietly. That's not for sale, I said. That belongs to the SEC or the FBI, depending on how Julian plays his cards in the next 48 hours. David looked at me for a long time. He shook his head, looking both frustrated and strangely impressed. You're the only client I've ever had who chose poverty over leverage. I'm choosing freedom, David. Freedom is expensive. I spent the rest of the day navigating the logistics of uncoupling. It is a strange, bureaucratic death. I sat in a bank branch, closing joint checking accounts. I called the insurance company to remove her from my policy. I canceled the shared Netflix subscription. Each administrative task was a small amputation. At 4:11 p.m., I found myself driving to the house. I hadn't planned to. I had told myself I would never go back. But I needed one thing, a box of drafting tools I had left in the garage. They were Japanese chisels my grandfather had given me. They were the only things in that house that predated Elena. I parked down the street. I didn't want to pull into the driveway. The house looked beautiful. The late afternoon sun hit the brick facade, making it glow warm and inviting. The hydrangeas I had planted 3 years ago were blooming, heavy blue heads bowing in the breeze. It was the picture of the American dream. I walked up the driveway. My key still worked. I opened the front door and stepped into the foyer. The house was silent. Elena wasn't home. She was likely huddled in a lawyer's office or trying to salvage her career at the firm. The silence was different now. It wasn't the peaceful silence of an empty home waiting for its occupants. It was the dead silence of a stage set after the play has been canceled. I walked through the living room. There were rectangular clean spots on the dusty shelves where pictures had been removed. She had taken down the wedding photos. She had taken down the picture of us in Paris. I went to the garage. My workshop was untouched. It was the one place she never entered because she hated the smell of sawdust. I found the box of chisels. I ran my hand over the worn wooden handle of the mallet. I should leave. I had what I came for. But I found myself walking back into the kitchen. I stood at the island where I had found the iPad. I looked at the spot on the floor where we had danced on her 30th birthday. I felt a ghost brushing past me, the ghost of the man I was a week ago. I looked at him with pity. He was so happy, so stupidly, blissfully happy. He thought he had it all. I took the set of keys off my ring, the house key, the mailbox key, the garage remote. I placed them on the granite counter. I pulled a piece of notepad paper from my pocket and a pen. I wrote 3 words. It's all yours. I left the note next to the keys. As I walked to the front door, I felt the weight lifting. It wasn't a sudden burst of joy. It was the slow, creaking release of a burden I hadn't realized I was carrying. I was leaving behind the expensive furniture, the high-end appliances, the equity, and the status. I was walking out with a box of old tools and a suit that needed dry cleaning. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me. The latch clicked, a final mechanical period at the end of a long, confusing sentence. I walked down the driveway past the blooming hydrangeas. I didn't look back. My phone buzzed as I reached the car. It was Victoria Vance. The 3 days weren't up yet, but the timeline had accelerated. Victoria, it's done. Julian resigned. The press release goes out in 10 minutes. I kept my end of the bargain. Elena is fired, but Julian is taking public responsibility for the financial irregularities to protect the merger. She's clear of the federal charges for now. I stared at the text. It was over. I had nuked the marriage, threatened the corporation, and in the end, I had saved her from prison. I got into my car and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I looked at the Japanese chisels in the box next to me. I had no house. I had no wife. I had no plan for tomorrow. I started the engine. For the first time in my life, the road ahead was completely blank. It was terrifying. It was empty, and it was mine. The conference room at the mediation center was designed to enforce neutrality. The walls were a calming, inoffensive beige. The table was a vast oval of polished mahogany, wide enough to ensure that opposing parties couldn't reach across and strangle each other. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that was just slightly too cold, keeping everyone alert and uncomfortable. I arrived 10 minutes early. David sat next to me, organizing a slender file folder. Unlike the mountains of paperwork usually associated with a high-asset divorce, our pile was thin. I had gutted the case before it even began by waiving my claim to the house. "She's going to be emotional," David warned, keeping his voice low. "Her lawyer, Samson, is a pit bull. He's confused by your offer. He thinks it's a trap. He's going to try to find the hidden angle." "There is no angle," I said, staring at a generic landscape painting on the far wall. "I just want to sign the papers and leave. Just let me do the talking until we get to the signature," David advised. The heavy door opened at exactly 10 a.m. Elena walked in first, followed by a short, aggressive-looking man in a pinstripe suit. Samson. I hadn't seen her face in 2 weeks. The last time I saw her, she was standing on the porch, screaming at my car. The woman who walked into the conference room today was a shadow of that person. She was dressed in a charcoal suit, severe and professional, but it hung loosely on her frame. She had lost weight. Her face, usually glowing with expensive creams and confidence, looked gaunt. There were dark circles under her eyes that concealer couldn't hide. She didn't look at me. She kept her eyes fixed on the empty leather chair opposite mine. She sat down. The silence in the room was thick, suffocating. "Good morning," the mediator, a soft-spoken woman named Mrs. Klein, began. "We are here to finalize the dissolution of marriage between Mark Evans and Elena Evans. My goal is to ensure that both parties understand the agreement and that we can conclude this amicably." Samson cleared his throat. "We have reviewed the draft. While my client appreciates the generosity regarding the real estate, we need to clarify the terms of the spousal support waiver. We want to ensure there are no future claims based on change of circumstance." "My client has waived everything," David said calmly. "It's in black and white. The house, the furniture, the joint assets. He is walking away with his personal effects and his business. That's it." Samson narrowed his eyes, looking at me. He couldn't process it. In his world, divorce was a war for resources. Surrender was suspicious. "And the intellectual property? The architecture firm?" "Sole ownership remains with Mr. Evans," David said, "as stipulated in the prenuptial agreement, which I remind you, your client insisted on 10 years ago to protect her potential earnings." Elena flinched. It was a small movement, a tightening of her jaw. She remembered. Back then, she was the one with the trust fund and the bright corporate future. She had wanted to make sure the artist husband didn't leech off her success. The irony was sharp enough to cut skin. "Fine," Samson said, shuffling papers. "We are prepared to sign." Mrs. Klein pushed the documents toward the center of the table. "If there are no further disputes, we can proceed." I reached for the pen. "Mark." Elena's voice was brittle, like dry leaves stepping on pavement. Samson put a hand on her arm to silence her, but she shook him off. She looked up, finally meeting my eyes. "Why?" she asked. David nudged me under the table, a signal to stay silent. I ignored him. Why what? I asked. The house, she said. Her voice wavered. It's worth nearly $1 million. You put 3 years of work into the renovation. You love that garden. Why did you just give it to me? Because it's not a home, Elena, I said. My voice was steady, devoid of the anger that had fueled me at the restaurant. It's a stage, and the play is over. I don't want the set design. She stared at me, her eyes filling with tears. They weren't the manipulative tears of the voicemail. They were tears of genuine confusion and loss. She couldn't understand a value system that prioritized peace over property. I lost my job, she whispered. I know, I said. Julian, he threw me to the wolves, she continued, the words spilling out now. He blamed the accounting errors on me. He said I was incompetent. He resigned with a $40 million golden parachute, and I got a severance package of 2 weeks' pay and a non-disparagement clause. I know, I repeated. I'm unhireable, she said, her voice rising in pitch. Mark, do you understand? I'm toxic. No firm in Chicago will touch me. I'm the scandal VP. I have nothing. You have the house, I pointed out gently. Sell it. Start over somewhere else. I don't want the house, she snapped, a flash of her old fire returning. I want my life back. I want to go back to before that stupid dinner. You can't, I said. You made a choice. You made it every day for 6 months. Every time you got in his car. Every time you lied to my face. I was lost, she cried. Samson was trying to hush her now, looking embarrassed, but she was past the point of caring about legal decorum. I was drowning in the pressure, Mark. You don't know what it's like. You with your quiet little drawings? I was in the arena. I needed someone who understood the fight. And look where the fight got you, I said. The room went silent again. The truth of it hung in the air. She had traded a partner who loved her for a partner who understood the arena. And the moment the bell rang, her new partner had used her as a human shield. She looked down at the polished table. Victoria, Vance called me. I stiffened. She told me that you gave her the evidence, Elena said softly. The invoices. She said you could have sent me to prison, but you traded the evidence for Julian's resignation. You made a deal to keep me out of jail. She looked up at me, searching my face. Why? After everything I did to you, why did you save me? I looked at the woman across the table. I looked for the anger I had nursed for weeks. I looked for the hatred that had made me print that photo. It wasn't there. I realized with a start that the cord had been cut. I didn't hate her. Hate requires passion. Hate requires investment. What I felt was a deep, distant pity. I felt the way you feel when you see a bird fly into a window pane. Sadness for the creature's stupidity, but no desire to heal it. Because I'm not you, Elena, I said. The words hit her harder than any insult could have. She recoiled physically, pressing her back against the leather chair. I'm not the kind of person who destroys people for leverage, I continued. I wanted the truth out. I got that. I didn't want your life to be over. I just wanted my life to be mine again. I picked up the pen. The scratching sound of the nib on the paper was loud in the room. I signed my name, Mark Evans. Then I dated it. I pushed the papers across the table to her. She looked at the document. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. She signed. It was a messy scrawl, nothing like the sharp, aggressive signature she used on contracts. It's done, Mrs. Klein said, pulling the papers back with a relieved exhale. We will file these with the court this afternoon. The divorce will be final in 30 days. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. It was a cheap jacket, one I had bought at a department store to replace the suits I had left behind. But it felt better than the bespoke ones she used to pick out for me. Mark, Elena said. She didn't. Stand up. She looked small in the big chair. What are you going to do? I'm going to work, I said. I have a library to finish. I miss you, she whispered. It was a desperate last-ditch attempt to find a foothold. I miss my best friend. I looked at her one last time. I remembered the ramen on the floor. I remembered the laughter. But those memories felt like they belonged to someone else. You didn't miss me when you were in the back of his Lincoln, I said, not with malice, but with a simple statement of fact. You don't miss me, Elena. You miss the safety. You miss the audience. I turned to David. Are we finished? We're finished, David said, gathering his briefcase. I walked to the door. Mark, she called out, her voice cracking into a sob. I didn't stop. I didn't hesitate. I opened the door and walked out into the hallway. Behind me, I heard the sound of her breaking down, a jagged, gasping sound of weeping. It was the sound of a woman realizing that the rock she had kicked away was the only thing keeping her from falling off the cliff. I walked to the elevator and pressed the down button. When the doors opened, I stepped inside. I watched the numbers count down. 14, 12, 10. With every floor, the air felt lighter. I wasn't happy. I wasn't triumphant. I was just light. The elevator dinged at the lobby. The doors slid open. Sunlight was streaming through the glass facade of the building. Real, unfiltered sunlight. I stepped out into the city. I was 34 years old. I was divorced. I was living in a rented apartment. And for the first time in a long time, the silence in my head wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. 2 months had passed since the mediation, 60 days of silence. I had moved into a loft in a converted warehouse in the Fulton Market District. It was nothing like the pristine, beige mausoleum in the suburbs. The floors were scarred hardwood. The walls were exposed brick. That crumbled if you brushed against it too hard, and the heating pipes rattled like a dying engine every time the boiler kicked on. I loved it. It was a space that required attention. It was imperfect. It was real. I was sitting at my drafting table at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday, sketching the final elevation for the library project. The only light came from the angle-poised lamp clamped to the desk and the glow of the city through the large industrial windows. Miles Davis was playing low on the turntable, blue and green. The buzzer rang. I froze, my pencil hovering over the vellum. I wasn't expecting anyone. I didn't have many visitors these days, having effectively pruned my social circle down to the few people who hadn't taken Elena's side in the narrative war. I ignored it. It rang again, a long, insistent drone that cut through the jazz trumpet. I sighed, put down the pencil, and walked to the intercom by the heavy steel door. I pressed the talk button. Yes? Mark. The voice was distorted by the static of the old speaker system, but I knew it. It was a voice I had listened to for 10 years, though it lacked the sharp, commanding cadence I was used to. It sounded thin, wet. Elena? Let me up, she said. Please, it's freezing out here. I looked at the monitor. The grainy black and white camera showed a figure standing by the call box. She wasn't wearing a coat. I shouldn't let her in. David would tell me not to let her in. My father would tell me to call the police. But the architect in me saw the structure failing, and the human in me couldn't just watch the collapse from a window. I pressed the buzzer. I unlocked my door and waited. I heard the freight elevator rattle and groan its way up to the 3rd floor. The metal gate clashed open. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. When she stepped into the frame of my open door, I almost didn't recognize her. The Elena I knew was a creature of armor. Hair, lacquered into place, makeup shielding her skin, clothes that cost more than a mortgage payment. The woman standing in my hallway was a raw nerve. She was soaking wet. Her hair was plastered to her skull, dark strands dripping water onto the shoulders of a ruined silk blouse. She was shivering violently. She looked thinner than she had at the mediation, her cheekbones protruding sharply, casting hollow shadows on her face. I didn't know where else to go, she said. Her teeth chattered. I stepped back, opening the door wider. Come in. She walked into the loft, hugging herself. She looked around the space, the brick, the drafting table, the half-eaten sandwich on the counter, with a look of disorientation. It was a foreign planet to her. Here, I said, grabbing a throw blanket from the sofa. I handed it to her. I didn't wrap it around her shoulders. I handed it to her. She took it, her fingers brushing mine. Her skin was ice cold. She wrapped herself in the wool and stood in the middle of the room, dripping onto the hardwood. Do you want tea? I asked. Or whiskey? Whiskey, she said immediately. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a glass and handed it to her. She drank half of it in one swallow, coughing as it hit her throat. I lost the house, she said. I leaned against the kitchen island, keeping a safe distance between us. I thought you were going to sell it. I couldn't, she said, staring into the amber liquid in her glass. The market tanked, and I stopped paying the mortgage. I stopped opening the mail. The bank served the foreclosure notice yesterday. Elena, I said softly, you had plenty of money. The settlement, it's gone, she interrupted. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Lawyers are expensive, Mark, especially when you're fighting a war on two fronts. Julian's legal team sued me for breach of contract to claw back my bonuses. They said I violated the morality clause. Can you believe that? Julian Vance talking about morality. She took another sip, her eyes finally meeting mine. They were bloodshot, rimmed with the red irritation of exhaustion. He won't even take my calls, she whispered. I went to his building today. Security escorted me out. They treated me like a homeless person. I was the vice president, Mark. I built that department, and the guard, he just looked at me and said, Mr. Vance is not available to you, ma'am. He used you, I said. We knew that. I know, she said, her voice cracking. I know. You were right. You were right about everything. She took a step toward me. The blanket dragged on the floor. I'm sorry, I know I said it at the mediation, but I mean it now. I'm so sorry. I was drunk on it. The power, the attention. He made me feel like I was the center of the universe. And now, she looked around the empty room. Now I'm just debris. Why are you here, Elena? I asked. She looked down, at her feet. I have no friends left. Jessica stopped texting me the day I was fired. My parents, they're ashamed. My mom told me I made my bed. She looked up again, and the desperation in her eyes was a physical force. You're the only one who ever actually loved me. Not the VP, not the shark, just me. I did love you, I said, past tense. We can fix it, she said, a frantic note entering her voice. She took another step. I can change. I'm done with that world. I hate it. I want a simple life. I want this. She gestured vaguely at my drafting table. I want to cook. I want to build something real. We can go away. We can move to Oregon or something. Just don't look at me like I'm a stranger. But you are a stranger, I said. She stopped. The words hit her like a physical blow. I'm your wife, she whispered. No, I said gently. My wife died 6 months ago. She died the night she decided that our life wasn't enough. The woman standing here, I don't know you. I pity you. I wish you no harm. But I don't know you. Mark, please, she sobbed, dropping the glass. It didn't break. It just bounced on the wood rug, spilling bourbon everywhere. She fell to her knees. It was a melodramatic, theatrical gesture, but it wasn't acting. It was the collapse of a narcissist who had run out of mirrors. I have nothing. I'm scared. Please just hold me. Just for tonight. I don't want to be alone. I looked down at her. She was weeping, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking under the gray wool blanket. A part of me, the muscle memory of 10 years, wanted to kneel down, wanted to smooth her hair and tell her it would be okay. It was the instinct of the rock, the steady hand. But I stayed standing. If I knelt down now, I would never get up. If I comforted her, I would become her crutch again. I would be the safety net she used until she found the next ladder to climb. She didn't miss me. She missed the way I made her feel safe. She was terrified of the dark, and I was just the nearest light switch. Get up, Elena, I said. She looked up, startled by the flatness of my voice. I'm not your husband anymore, I said, and I'm not your savior. You destroyed the safety net. You have to hit the ground. You're throwing me out, she gasped. In the rain? I'll call you an Uber, I said. I'll pay for a hotel for a week. I'll give you the number of a good recruiter. But you can't stay here. Mark. No, I said. The word was a wall, solid, impenetrable. I pulled out my phone and ordered the car. I watched the little digital car move on the map. 4 minutes away. I went to the closet and pulled out a heavy coat, an old parka I used for site visits. Put this on, I said. She stood up slowly. She looked at the coat, then at me. Her face hardened. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a flash of the old anger. The survival instinct was kicking back in. "You're enjoying this?" she spat, seeing me begging. "I'm not enjoying it," I said, handing her the coat. "I hate it. It breaks my heart, but I'm not going to set myself on fire to keep you warm anymore." She snatched the coat from my hand. She put it on, buttoning it with trembling fingers. "Fine," she said. Her voice was brittle again. "Fine. I don't need you. I don't need anyone." "The car is downstairs," I said. She walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the latch. She didn't look back. "You think you won?" she said to the doorframe. "You think you're noble, but you're just alone, Mark, just like me." "Maybe," I said, "but I like the company I keep." She slammed the door. I listened to her footsteps fade down the hallway. I heard the elevator rattle. I walked to the door and threw the deadbolt. Click. Then I walked to the window. I watched the street below. A minute later, a black sedan pulled up. A figure in an oversized parka ran out of the building and got into the back seat. The car pulled away, its taillights dissolving into the rainy blur of the Chicago night. I stood there for a long time, watching the empty street. I waited for the guilt. I waited for the urge to run after her. It didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was the feeling of a heavy weight finally being put down. The story of Mark and Elena was over. There was no sequel. There was no epilogue. I turned back to the room. The bourbon stain was dark on the rug. I would have to clean that up. I walked over to the turntable. The record had finished. The needle was bumping softly against the center groove. Thump, thump, thump. I lifted the needle. Silence rushed back into the room. I sat back down at the drafting table. I picked up my pencil. I looked at the elevation of the library. The entrance needed more light. It needed to be more welcoming. I started to draw. The lines were clean. The perspective was true. I was alone. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone to come home. The light in the atrium was exactly right. That was the first thought I had as I stood in the corner of the newly opened Southside Community Library, sipping a lukewarm, sparkling water. It was 11 a.m. on a Saturday, exactly 1 year and 2 weeks since the night at Le Cuckoo. The space was packed. There were no tuxedos, no backless emerald dresses, and no sharks circling for a merger. There were parents chasing toddlers, teenagers huddled around the charging stations, and seniors reading newspapers in the sunbeams that filtered through the louvers I had spent 3 months designing. "It breathes, doesn't it?" I turned to see Sarah, the library director. She was a woman in her 60s with a no-nonsense haircut and a smile that could light up a basement. "It breathes," I agreed. The airflow analysis was correct. The natural convection pulls the heat up and out. "I don't care about the convection, Mark," she laughed, patting my arm. "I care that the kids aren't sweating. You did good. You built something that matters." Something that matters. The phrase echoed in my head, dislodging a memory of Elena standing in my office, sneering at my little hobby. "It matters to nobody who counts," she had said. Looking around the room at the chaotic, vibrant life filling the space I had drawn from nothing, I realized she was wrong. These were the people who counted. My life had changed drastically in the last 12 months. I hadn't become a millionaire. I hadn't become a shark. If anything, my life had become smaller, more distilled. I was still living in the loft in Fulton Market. I had adopted a dog, a scruffy, three-legged rescue named Buster, who snored louder than a freight train. My firm was still small, just me and 2 junior draftsmen, but we were booked solid for the next 18 months. I wasn't dating. Not really. I had gone for coffee with a few women, but I wasn't in a rush. I was learning to enjoy the silence. I was learning that being alone didn't mean being lonely. It meant having the space to hear your own thoughts without them being drowned out by someone else's demands. "Mr. Evans," a local reporter was standing there with a recorder. "Can we get a quote for the Tribune about the inspiration for the design?" "Sure," I said. The inspiration was stability. I wanted to build something that felt like it had always been here and would always be here, a shelter from the noise. I left the opening around 1 p.m. The autumn air was crisp, smelling of dry leaves and Lake Michigan wind. I buttoned my coat, a heavy wool pea coat that I had bought for myself, and adjusted my scarf. Buster was waiting at the doggy daycare a few blocks away, but I decided to walk the long way. I wanted to feel the city. I walked down State Street, watching the tourists and the locals. Felt solid. That was the only word for it. For years I had felt porous, like I was constantly leaking energy to keep Elena inflated. Now I was dense, grounded, contained. I decided to stop at a coffee shop near Millennium Park. It was a tourist trap usually, but they made a decent espresso. I walked in, the bell chiming above the door. The line was long. I stood at the back, checking my emails on my phone. A message from David, my lawyer, just a friendly check-in. A message from my dad, asking if I wanted to watch the Bears game on Sunday. Mark? The voice came from a table to my left. It wasn't the voice I heard in my nightmares anymore. It was just a sound, familiar but distant, like a song from a radio station I used to listen to in high school. I turned. Elena was sitting alone at a small, wobbly round table. She had a laptop open, surrounded by stacks of paper. She was wearing a beige trench coat that looked slightly too big for her, and her hair was pulled back in a severe functional ponytail. She looked normal. That was the most shocking part. The glamour was gone. The dangerous high-gloss sheen of the VP was gone. She looked like a mid-level manager trying to catch up on work over the weekend. She looked tired. There were fine lines around her mouth that hadn't been there a year ago. "Hello, Elena," I said. My pulse didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I felt a mild curiosity, nothing more. I didn't expect to see you here," she stammered, half rising from her chair before sinking back down. She looked nervous. "I saw the article about the library. It looks beautiful." "Thank you," I said. "It opened today." "Right, today." She looked down at her coffee cup. It was a paper cup, the lid chewed on the edge, a nervous habit she had quit 10 years ago and apparently restarted. "I'm happy for you, Mark. Really. You always said you wanted to do community work." "How are you?" I asked. It wasn't a loaded question. "I'm okay," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm working at a boutique agency now. Consulting. It's smaller, but it pays the bills. I'm living in Edgewater, a small apartment. It's quiet." "Quiet is good," I said. "Is it?" She looked up at me, and for a second the mask slipped. I saw the hunger again. Not the hunger for power, but the hunger for relevance. She missed the arena. She missed the noise. She was surviving, but she was starving. "I heard about Julian," she said softly. "Oh? He's in prison," she said. "Tax evasion. His wife testified against him. She took everything. The company, the house, the kids. He got 5 years." "I know," I said. "I read the news." She looked at me, searching for some sign of gloating, some shared moment of vindication. "You destroyed him, Mark. You took down a giant." "I didn't take him down, Elena," I corrected her gently. "He fell. I just refused to catch him." She nodded slowly, biting her lip. She looked at my coat, my scarf, my face. She was assessing me, comparing the man standing before her with the furniture she had discarded. "You look different," she said. "You look taller." "I'm standing up straighter," I said. There was a silence between us. The coffee shop noise, the hiss of the espresso machine, the chatter of tourists filled the gap. It was the silence of two people who have said everything there is to say, and yet have nothing to say to each other. "I miss you," she blurted out. It was a reflex, a test. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had mocked me at dinner, the woman who had slept with her boss in a Lincoln, the woman who had begged on my floor. And I realized that I didn't miss her. I didn't even know who she was. She was just a collection of insecurities and ambitions wrapped in a trench coat. "No, you don't," I said simply. "You miss the idea of me. You miss having a witness to your life." "But I'm not in the audience anymore, Elena." I checked my watch. "I have to go. My dog is waiting." "You got a dog?" she asked, her eyes widening. "You always wanted a dog." I said no because of the hair. "Yeah," I smiled. A genuine, easy smile. "He sheds everywhere. It's great." I stepped back. "Take care of yourself, Elena." "Mark," she called out as I turned away. I paused, but I didn't turn back. Was it worth it? She asked. Her voice was trembling. Blowing it all up? The house, the money, the friends? Was it worth it just to be right? I thought about the library full of kids. I thought about the quiet mornings in my loft with Buster. I thought about the peace of mind that came from knowing exactly who I was and what I stood for. I didn't do it to be right, I said over my shoulder. I did it to be free. I walked out of the coffee shop and into the sunshine. I crossed Michigan Avenue, heading toward the park. I didn't look back to see if she was watching through the window. It didn't matter. The city was sprawled out before me, a grid of steel and stone, infinite possibilities and new structures waiting to be built. The wind bit at my cheeks, cold and invigorating. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sharp air. I was an architect, and for the first time, the blueprint in front of me was entirely my own. I started to run, just a light jog, toward the lake, toward the horizon, toward the rest of my life.